Okay, so we're going to take a look at the building blocks of digital music for a minute, taking a break from the settings, thankfully. We're going to talk about what constitutes digital music, like what goes into it, the different kinds of blocks or chunks that we're going to use to make it up. So first of all, I want to say that the word audio is a synonym, means the same as sound. So audio is sound, and everything that we're doing gets transformed into audio when it comes out of our speakers. When we're dealing with music production, we're dealing with audio, really. Even if we're using anything else, it's still going to be converted in the end to audio. But how we get that audio and how we use it varies. There's different ways to do that. So the first way, which is probably the most intuitive or simple to think about, is we would just record it. Now, in order to record audio, you do need some kind of audio interface, like I've talked about before, where you can plug microphones into so that you can get the audio from your instrument or your voice or whatever it is you want to record into your computer. You need some way to get it there. And you get it there by using a microphone connected by a cable to your audio interface. And the audio interface is going to change the analog audio signal, the voltage in the cable, into the bits in your computer, zeros and ones, and represent it as this. So here we have a recording that I did quite a while ago of my guitar. So we can see, if we zoom in a little bit, we can see it's made up of this waveform. Now, this waveform is a display of the audio information itself. So the higher these peaks get, the louder. And this is like a moment by moment, sample by sample representation of the audio as it's stored on your computer. So I'm going to play this now. So, as you can see, it looks just like some colors on a screen, but really it's information that's representing audio. And when it plays, the computer plays that back, it gets converted back into an analog audio signal, sound waves, and we end up hearing it through our headset or our speakers or whatever we're using. So, now that's the first way we can go about getting audio into the computers, by recording it, but we're not going to be doing too much of that in this chapter of the Lydian course because most of us don't have an audio interface. If you do, you're free to experiment, and I will talk more about that in the future, but for now, let's move on. So let's put this back. Now let's talk about sampling. So sampling is basically using audio from another source and making your song out of that. So in this case, I've got this sample. I'll play it for you. So this is like some strings, obviously, from an old movie. And this is what is meant by sampling. We've taken this sample from another source. I didn't record this, but now I have it as an audio file in Studio One, and that's called using a sample. Sampling is great because you don't need a microphone. You can just use other audio that you can find around or purchase or whatever you want. And then you have kind of this source material to make your songs out of. So I've also mapped this sample to my keyboard so I can go like, I can even pitch bend. So you probably heard stuff like that before. Sampling is super popular in like hip hop and some electronic music because it has a really interesting sound to it. It's kind of, if you take samples from old music, it sounds like blending old styles with modern styles, which is really cool. Or you can just take samples out of modern music and then you kind of have a great sound source to work from to kind of warp and skew and cut up and move around, kind of like we did in the previous task that you completed, where you took the Twilight Water song. That's essentially sampling. Those were samples or pieces of audio that I created, and then by chopping it up, you're effectively sampling what I made and then reorganizing it into your own song. So this is another way to sample where we've taken audio from another recording, in this case an old movie, and then we could use that in a beat or in whatever we want for our music. The next thing is MIDI. Now MIDI is like our best friend. MIDI is what we're going to be using most of the time. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And MIDI itself is not audio, it's not sound. It's just messages, like computer messages. So if I double click this, you see all these little blocks down here? You see there's a little keyboard running vertically. These blocks line up with the keyboard and are actually representing the notes on the keyboard. So when I click them, or the notes on the keyboard. So if I play this, so these MIDI notes aren't actually the sound itself, they're just triggering a synthesizer. So the synthesizer is the largest component of electronic music and many modern styles, and it's what's producing the sound right now. It's what's creating the audio. And these MIDI messages that I've put in here, actually using my MIDI keyboard that we talked about earlier, are just, they don't have any audio in them. They're just triggering the synthesizer. They're telling the synthesizer, play the note C, play the note G, play the note E flat, for how long, how hard, what sound to use. So MIDI is extremely useful and you can do so much with it. It's completely amazing. So we're going to get into that in a big way in the future. For now, it's enough to see this and realize that the MIDI itself is not the audio. It is just messages that are triggering something to play back audio, whether that's a synthesizer or a sampler or whatever it might be. We're using MIDI messages to trigger that thing. And the last thing we're going to talk about here is loops. Now, all these methods can be converted into a loop. A loop is what it sounds like. It's just a piece of audio that loops smoothly on itself over and over again. So let's check this out. I'll just put a loop around this piece of audio. So you can see when it gets to the end, it comes back to the beginning and loops perfectly. So loops, again, are similar to what we did with the Twilight Waters kind of restructuring we did in the last task, except when we did that, we were taking the pieces of audio from in the session. They were sitting right there and we chopped them up and moved them around. Normally, the loops will be sitting in the browser over here, and we're going to pull them into our session to work with them. So this is an example of a loop that you're going to have access to shortly, which is basically from the Lydian Loops Volume 1. And this is what we're going to use to make our next piece of music, is the loops that you find in this pack that I've made. So loops come in all shapes and sizes. They can be made of MIDI or audio, but of course everything ends up being audio in the end. They can be drums or instruments. They will tell you what their tempo is. They will tell you what key they're in. All sorts of good information. And the great thing about them is it's really fast to work with. Like if you just need something quick, like some drums, you can just drag a loop in and it's done. You don't have to worry about playing the drum part yourself or choosing your drum sounds. Loops can speed up a lot of our music making process. And in the beginning, we're going to be using loops extensively. And then as we progress through the course, we're eventually going to phase them out and start composing everything ourselves instead of relying on loops made by other people. So relying on loops made by other people makes music easy for us because we don't have to know everything just yet. We just have to have a good ear in terms of we have to know what we want to hear, and we can just arrange the loops like we want instead of having to know all the music theory and keyboard skills and play it all ourselves. So that being said, that really covers the 4 main ways that music is created on the computer. All of them are audio, but we can record things ourselves directly through a microphone. We can sample things from other people or other sources and use that. We can use synthesizers controlled by MIDI or samplers controlled by MIDI. And we can use pre-made loops that either we've built ourselves, created ourselves, or that we've bought or downloaded from some source. And there's a whole bunch of loops that also come built in with Studio One that we're going to talk about very soon. So that does it for now. In the next video, we're going to go over a few more settings. Groan, I know, sorry, but it just needs to be done. So I'll see you there.